50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Professor Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck. And maybe we could continue talking about some of the things we've talked about in the past, namely the separation of powers that our republic enjoys and some of the tension that's out there these days.
Always glad to be back.
Well, it's nice to have you back.
Yes.
And so we've talked about many things, and right now there's a lot of tension in the country. The Democrats control the executive branch, and then one of the houses of the legislative body, and there's a lot of tension between the two. The Republicans control a lot of state houses, so we have lots and lots of tension out there. And I think we need to explore the guidance the Constitution gives us on these problems. And maybe you can comment a little bit on some of the issues that have taken place recently with recess appointments. I mean, what exactly is all that about?
Well, before we get specifically to the recess appointments, I think I'd like to back up to some of your earlier statements about the role of the president. That if we go back to the beginning, if we go back to 1787, 1789, when the Constitution was written, and the first administrations of President George Washington, I don't think people would have said, if you would ask them on the street, that the president was the leader of the country. The president was certainly the leader of the executive branch.
Yes.
But he certainly did not lead Congress in any sense, and Congress was the chief lawmaking authority. Yes. And as a matter of fact, the only time Washington or the next 5 presidents ever vetoed a law was when they were convinced that it was blatantly unconstitutional. They simply did not involve themselves in the legislative process. They did not submit proposed budgets, to my knowledge. Maybe they did.
Yes.
And now today we have a president who people would immediately think is the leader of the country.
Yes.
And since it's the Democrats who control the White House, it's easier for people to reflexively cast the Republicans as the stumbling block or the roadblock in Congress.
That's a rather profound sort of exploration of the issue. One of the things about Washington, did he look upon himself as King George in a way? I mean, he had a coach and he just wouldn't get in the fray possibly, or when he did, it was only with great provocation. He was more restrained and above the fray. Is that a fair?
He wanted to try to remain above the fray. Obviously, he was nearing the end of his life. Certainly by his second term, he was tired.
Yes.
I don't think he and his wife Martha ever got to dine alone in 30 or 40 years at any single night. And that kind of pressure has to be hard. He had dental problems. His teeth were always hurting him.
Right.
And his Secretary of the Treasury was, in a way, the son he never had, Alexander Hamilton, who was young and vigorous and had very strong ideas.
Yes.
And so I think as time passed, he found himself, I won't say let himself be led, because he was a man of very strong will, but he deferred more and more to Hamilton, and thus became viewed as more and more partisan over time.
Well, just sort of staying on the subject a bit, I mean, the role of the president and how we have this impasse that bedevils us in 2013.
Yes.
The president it has gone up and down in the whole American political process, and I was sort of trying to make the case that Washington's view of the role was not a contemporary one, and he was sort of more of a regal figure, and looked upon the example of the kings in England, who were at that point somewhat reserved.
Somewhat more removed
as
a constitutional matter.
And then it seems to be when war occurs, the president stepped forward substantially. Is that a fair statement?
It's very true that, and part of that is simply how the Constitution is written. Article 1 is the legislative article. It's by far the longest.
Yes.
Article 2, which deals with the president, is a good bit shorter,
Yes.
and because of that, it tends to be more vague.
Yes.
And therefore, a president who wishes to be activist can put more substance into those vague statements. So I
Yes.
would say that the two things that really have let the president emerge as the leader,
Yes.
if you will, other than the fact that he's a single person,
Yes.
is the fact that he has the power to name ambassadors and make treaties.
Yes.
Those are actually two articles. And then the third one, that he's commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And
Yes.
that gives him a great deal of power in foreign affairs
Yes.
and therefore in war as well.
Is there something, as we look at our history, we tend to sort of seize on names of presidents for a particular era, the Jacksonian era, but or whatever era you want to pick. But
Yes.
the presidents were there, but they were just one name, and sometimes it's easier for our minds to grapple with it's one person, and therefore we tend to exalt the presidents more than they were exalted in their contemporary times.
Well, yes, and if you read Walter Lippmann, the great mid-century American commentator, he points out that, especially in times of crisis, for the same reasons the Romans would look to
Yes.
the dictator, or
Yes.
they look to Cincinnatus to be the
Right.
great war leader. And of course, Washington patterned himself
Yes,
after
yes.
Cincinnatus. You don't tend to look towards a committee, you look to the president,
Yes.
and that gives whoever's in the White House a natural advantage in terms
Yes.
of leadership.
So, in a way, crisis is something that that pushes the executive branch forward and pushes the president forward. So we have a period of crisis, and then the president becomes powerful,
Yes.
and the era is named after him. And then we have a period of benign neglect, and the president is just an irrelevant
Indeed.
name.
Indeed.
And so we've been through lots and lots of events in the 20th century. We had these enormous, I guess, economic challenges. We've had all kinds of social and economic events. We've had wars, the triumph over the communist system. We've had all these advances, events, you'd say, and the president. We've had strong presidents.
Yes.
And now we're in a situation where the president is going to have a second term and is seeming to act in a very assertive fashion. Is that?
Yes, and there are several reasons for that. First of all, that we are in, if you will, an ongoing crisis. One of the great positive points, if you can put it like that, to industrialized state-sanctioned warfare of previous eras is that you usually know when the war is over.
Yes.
Whether it's the signing of a treaty at Versailles or the Russians marching into Berlin,
Yes.
it's over.
Yes.
With the war on terror, when does this war end? And since presidential power tends to expand during wartime, and there's no natural end to this war on terror, that can be a very grave threat to our civil libertarian tradition.
Yes.
And the second one is, since President Obama is now banned by law from ever running for president again,
Yes.
he's not responsible to the people for the next 4 years. He can pretty much do as he wishes. Now, and that's a typical thing. That's any president
Yes,
who's won a
right,
second
yes,
term.
yes.
The one natural limitation on that, of course, well, not natural but historical, is that presidents have traditionally had a rougher time convincing
Yes.
Congress to do things their way during their second terms.
Yes, yes.
So Washington being a good
Right,
example.
Yes, yes. Well, we have all these, I guess, sort of colors of the picture.
Yes.
You mentioned, and I think it's worth talking about this, I think it's a very germane point, that if we have a war in perpetuity, so in other words, when you look at our country, we're going to be in war in perpetuity against something called terrorism. And something will take place somewhere in the world, and when that occurs, there's an argument that the government, i.e. the executive branch, has to be very assertive about using a word that often gives me chills, protect. So we're very cautious about the word protect. We have to be real careful about
Yes.
what protection is. But the idea is you're going to protect everyone by, in some ways, infringing on civil liberties. I mean, but now, having said the executive is doing that, Congress is certainly not stopping anything, are they? They're going very much along with this.
They are. The Patriot Act being the prime example of that, which
Yes.
was a bipartisan act,
Yes.
and it continues to be supported in a bipartisan
Yes,
fashion.
yes.
And I really think that the downfall of civil liberties in America will be dated from the passage of the Patriot Act.
Yes.
So,
And it seems to be we're in this sort of a permanent situation because the world tension is, I mean, can anyone imagine that world tension is going to diminish? I mean, it just seems impossible, doesn't it?
No, and it's the concentration of force in the hands of the individual just by virtue of technology is getting greater and greater.
Yes, yes. So a very worrisome thing. It's not to say it's wrong for the government to take whatever steps are necessary, but still, I think the American public needs to be watching this process extremely carefully. And there are trade-offs, are there not?
Yes.
You know, how far should the government's protective hand go? I mean, there's a limit.
Yes, yes.
But just to keep discussing this, so it seems to me that there's not, Congress, the president are on the same wavelength on this. There's not any particular clash, but where the clash is occurring is over money.
Yes.
That seems to be the problem.
Yes.
And so in looking at some of these issues, the president is trying to put his programs through, the Congress is trying to stop that. And maybe you can, we'll get to our initial question a little bit later, but we can,
Yes,
as we approach that question, one of the I guess points of controversy is the Congress, and particularly the House of Representatives, attempting to exercise their constitutional power to basically stop government expenditures.
Yes.
And that's being resisted by the executive branch.
Yes, yes.
And go ahead, could you speak to that?
Well, I think the starting point, once again, is to give us the right perspective that since the President and the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, are expected to submit budget requests, the idea is that, the subliminal idea, if you will, is that Congress is supposed to rubber stamp that. And
Yes.
so that the true budget is supposed to originate with the White House.
Yes.
But really, I could submit a budget suggestion to my congressman and
Yes.
say that's what we should do. And that's really all the president is doing. Really, the budget and expenditures and appropriations and revenues, that's a matter for Congress.
And it's a matter of
yes.
the House of Representatives.
Specifically,
and
yes.
the Senate has a role, but the House of Representatives, which is under Republican control, presumably can control things to an enormous degree by power of the purse.
Well, the constitutional phrase, I think, reads, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House.
Yes.
And that doesn't, and raising revenue doesn't mean raising taxes. It means revenue bills.
Yes. Or you could borrow
determining
money.
how, yes, exactly.
So the Republicans in the House of Representatives are exercising some power on this, or they're at least making, I guess, waves on that subject, that they're going to basically stop government expenditures. They'll close the government down. I mean, can you speak to that point? How can they do that? They're just going to say, no, we're not going to let you have any more money?
That's the idea, except for essential services, perhaps, which is what some of the continuing resolutions have dealt with. And that's what we've been operating under, by the way, for the last 4 years at least, is a thing called a continuing resolution, which essentially is an agreement to disagree.
Yes.
That we will pass a budget that is the same budget as we passed last
Yes,
year,
yes.
without any changes at all. We'll simply continue
Yes,
the things as
yes.
they are. But yes, people think that this is a terrible thing, gun to the head, that we shut down the government. I think the thing we have to remember is that all of us in this country are responsible for it having come to that. We have deficit spent practically every year for 50 years, with a few exceptions, I think, during the Clinton years.
Yes.
We've run up this huge national debt. And I don't think it is really a bad thing to be reminded that at some point the well runs dry.
Yes.
And the fact that the Democrats are accusing the Republicans of doing this, I think, is disingenuous. The Republicans could accuse the Democrats of exactly the same thing.
So we have this, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at in a way
Yes.
is that these two forces are colliding with
Yes.
one another, and it is possible for either of those forces, if they don't put the country's best interests at first, to really cripple the country. Either branch, either party can really injure the country.
Yes.
And so some kind of accommodative arrangement needs to take place. And I mean and it's almost like the people they demand that. I mean, we have to preserve the country. The politicians have to make sausage, if that's a fair statement. They have to do something.
Just as Bismarck said, I believe. Yes, and that's the thing. And this is, I seem to be quoting Washington, George Washington, a great deal tonight, that in his farewell address he warned against
Yes.
partisanship, and of course the Constitution and the founders, when they wrote the Constitution, did not foresee that parties would develop. It was a nasty result of the 1790s. And the problem with partisans in Washington's eyes, and this is true, that ultimately, if you get down to it, Democrats don't want what is best for the country. They want what is best for the Democratic Party. Republicans likewise want what is best for the Republican Party. Now, I imagine I'll get a lot of hate mail from Democrats and Republicans for saying that. But the fact is that if you are a partisan, a member of an organized party, then you have, at the very least, loyalty split between your country and your group of people. And that makes negotiation, that's an impediment to negotiation right there.
Well, having circled the mountain, we're getting back to our initial query here. And in some ways, maybe we've put some good, substance about why we're having this impasse. But it's a border war, isn't it? So the executive branch is attempting to sort of assert itself and push the boundaries out a bit, and the legislature is pushing back, and the arbitrators of this allegedly are the courts. So in this decision, apparently, and we discussed, I mean, it may be you're not totally, you might not have read this, but you could maybe make some general comments about how this happened about recess appointments.
Yes, that for a certain category of appointments, and the classic example would be a cabinet official and other senior officers, unlike the czars of recent decades, the president needs the Senate to confirm the appointment. The exception to that would be if the Senate is in recess, you can have a recess appointment. And that happened very early on. The second Chief Justice of the United States, John Rutledge, was in fact a recess appointment. And this would have been, I think, 1795. And when the Senate returned to session, it actually said no. It vetoed that. So Rutledge was never officially confirmed and had to vacate the premises.
Well, that's not an uncommon story, is it?
No, I mean, not at all. Not at all.
All the Senate has to do is reappear, but apparently, go ahead.
Well, the way the Senate has tried to get around that, and keep in mind we do have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic presidential administration, so it's not partisan. It's branch oriented here, because branches are very jealous of their powers. That the Senate has managed to maintain a minimal quorum and call people in and convene for a few moments and then adjourn for the day for several days running, and thus maintain the Obama would say the fiction that they are not in recess, whereas Obama would claim, but they really are. They're conducting no business, and they're doing this simply to prevent me from making a recess appointment. And so I'm going to hereby declare that they really are substantively in recess, and therefore I can make an appointment to these contested positions. And then the courts have jumped in. I believe, I can't remember, I think at D.C. Circuit has said, no, the Senate is in session, these recess appointments are invalid. And I think that's the right answer. Once again, I think that presidential power has, over the last 70 years, crept and sometimes leapt into areas where it should not go, and appointments is one of them.
Well, in just examining this issue a little bit, it doesn't the executive, I mean, speaking in a neutral fashion, or being as neutral as I can be, it does seem that if you've got an executive branch, I guess you're part of your militia, part of your army, you've got a division that reports to you, you want a commander of that division that will carry out your will. And it would be terrible if Congress would never let you put your guy in there, and it would be it would defeat the people's will in a way. Any comments about that?
Well, it's interesting because, and the thing that immediately flashed to mind was the Democratic President James Buchanan, who was president on the eve of the Civil War. He immediately preceded Lincoln. And Lincoln's election brought about the secession of the southern states in late 1860 and early 1861. Back then, of course, the president was not inaugurated until March, so Buchanan was a lame duck for several months. But everybody was looking to Buchanan, Mr. President, South Carolina has seceded, Georgia has seceded, what will you do? And Buchanan did something that sounds very alien to us today, who expect the president to do something. He said, well, the states don't have the right to secede, but if they do, the president doesn't have the power to do anything about it. And he just punted. And if you think about it, people who go after the presidency, especially today, they don't do it in order to sit in a rocking chair and take a nap. They
Yes.
have very strong ideas about what they want to accomplish.
Yes.
They don't like being impeded in their attempt to get there.
Yes.
And so just by temperament, they are going to want to do whatever they think they can do within the confines of whatever constraints they're dealing with to get their way. And if Congress is stopping them
Yes.
somehow, they're going to become impatient and maybe go over the line.
You know, I guess in some ways the fate of our species depends on the political process in Washington.
Yes.
That might be too strong of a statement. And that's a very complicated kind of thing. The wisdom that any one person has is a very limited quantity. And that many people, as they make their way through politics, make alliances. They have to pay the alliances back. And from my personal experience, I mean, I guess I can say this on television, many people that go into politics are there for the wrong reason. I guess I
Yes.
could say that.
Yes.
And which is not so much the idea of public service, but they've got their own sort of crasser motives.
Yes.
And so you put that together, I mean, we have to have some kind of restraint. I mean, it's really a genius. Our forefathers were geniuses in a way to, even though we'd like to get a good result and an efficient result, we have to, maybe that's the price we pay for our system, that we have this collision and this bickering and things that look bad in the newspaper.
Yes, and I was telling one of my classes last night, this is not supposed to be an efficient government.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a government that restrains power.
Yes.
And that has nothing to do with efficiency. And Obama himself has said a fairly famous statement fairly early in his first term that he does get impatient and that he would like to
Yes.
Be able to do things unilaterally more. And of course, now that he has no more elections to worry about,
Yes.
it is going to be natural for someone of his temperament to try to push the envelope.
Now, you've said something pretty powerful here. The purpose of the United States political system is to restrain power.
Yes.
That's a pretty powerful thing. Well, to make a little joke, powerful thing. And I would say Europeans do not exactly understand that. Well, I mean, maybe do our Canadian brothers understand it? I don't know, maybe.
Yes.
But the idea is, many people would say the political system exists to help and maybe exalt the people. The government is not there to restrain power. The government is there to make sure I have enough to eat, the air conditioner works, the whatever, the water is pure, and no wars take place. All these things it's supposed to do, and we don't particularly care if power is going to some person or some entity as long as those things are happening. And that's many times a European, and dare I say a Canadian view. That's a little joke for my Canadian friends. But
Yes. Well, once again, I'm going back to the Constitution as originally written, and it was really a tightrope between two experiences, both of which were not only within living memory
Yes.
of the authors, but very strong. The two biggest events of their lives are
yes.
certainly one big.
Right.
One, of course, was excessive power, in their view,
Right.
exercised by the British government during the American Revolution. And the other was the impotency of our new national government under
Yes.
the Articles of Confederation. So one was too hot,
Yes,
one
yes,
was too cold.
yes.
What they were trying to achieve in the Constitution was just right. A national government that had the power to govern effectively, but not so much power that it would tyrannize the people.
yes,
Now, of course, we add to that the layer of the social welfare state
Yes.
and the New Deal, and people have the idea that the role of government is to take care of us. But
Yes.
of course, to take care of us means to redistribute wealth,
Yes.
which potentially brings the government afoul of the free market capitalist system,
yes.
which at this point you're probably talking major constitutional amendments, and hence we get the great debate.
Well, we're not going to get any constitutional amendments, are we? So
No.
that's an interesting kind of thing. So our forefathers said, well, look, if you guys encounter trouble a couple of centuries from now and we know things will change, you could just change the Constitution. Instead, no one is doing that. No one thinks of it.
But we do.
Well, they
the
don't.
courts do. Yes, the courts do it. I would argue that the Obamacare decision last summer was tantamount to a constitutional amendment, which has really given the government power that no one would have dreamed it had
Unlimited,
70 years ago.
unlimited taxation.
Yes,
No,
yes.
no restraint at all in their ability to tax
And
anyone, anywhere, about anything.
Yes, and it's much easier to get five sympathetic votes on the Supreme Court than to get 3/4 of the state governments to pass a formal amendment.
Although it can flip the other way, can it?
It
not?
can indeed.
It can flip
Yes,
a
it
lot
can.
easier. It can flip back.
Yes, yes.
Well, we're getting near the end of our chat tonight, but maybe you can make some comments about the executive, I guess, orders about different things, and maybe specifically about gun control. You can make any comments about that?
Yes, it was very interesting. I believe it was the New Yorker magazine that recently, on the occasion when Obama issued, I think, a dozen executive orders about gun control, and the Republicans criticized him for that. The New Yorker ran an article entitled, Republicans accuse President of trying to lead country.
Yes.
I thought that very ironic because it was 40 years ago that the great Democratic historian and New Frontiersman Arthur Schlesinger wrote a book entitled The Imperial Presidencies, talking about how the president was going too far in the use of executive orders and czars. So it makes a difference whose ox is gored. It's all right for the president to exercise great powers if he's a Democrat, but if he's Richard Nixon, then it's not okay. Or if he's a Republican, it's not okay.
Well, we've talked a little bit about this before, about executive orders, but really, unless the courts say you can't do that, and they seem disinclined to do that, the president really doesn't need Congress. He doesn't need it. I mean, he could just, anything the president wanted to do could be propagated.
Yes.
Is that fair? I mean, no.
Congress can say no.
Yes.
Probably the best analysis of executive orders was a concurring opinion in the Youngstown case around 60 years ago. I think it was Robert Jackson who says, when Congress has generally expressed approval, the president's powers are at the greatest. When Congress has very clearly expressed disapproval, the president's powers are at the least when it comes to executive orders. When Congress has said nothing, that's the question mark. And of course, Congress is very largely saying nothing these last few years.
Well, just to make a comment, and we're near our end, if an executive order came down, and I don't happen to like this executive order, I'm a private citizen, I want this executive order thrown out.
Yes.
What would you do about it?
Well, you may run afoul, depending on the order, of this thing called political question, which means if it affects everybody, the courts will decide it affects no one legally, because their recourse is not to sue, their recourse is to vote the bums out.
But the president has done this, and so how can you get the president out? He's finished his term, and do executive orders stay in forever? When do executive orders sunset?
That's a good question. Some of them probably sunset at the time of the president's leaving, unless they're reenacted. It's sort of like a commanding officer relieving his predecessor on a ship. The first thing he says is, all standing orders remain in force.
Yes.
So I'm not really sure of that, though. I'd have to.
Well, we're near our end here. I hope the courts will look into this issue. I mean, I think it's an important thing that needs more attention. We just can't have a series of executive orders without any checks and balances. We need checks and balances on these things.
We do, and unfortunately, we're moving away from that towards the imperial presidency.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Bucky.
Thank you for having me.
We had another good
Always
chat
good to be
tonight.
here.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.